This is Daywatch on CNN for Tuesday, June 10th.
Good morning. William Rogers, the head of the Presidential Challenger Commission, goes before both House and Senate panels today to talk about his report on the Challenger explosion. Yesterday, that report became public when Rogers and the other commission members presented it to President Reagan. Rogers first goes before the House Science and Technology Committee, and CNN will bring you that hearing live beginning about 9:30 Eastern Time. The Shuttle Commission has singled out NASA's internal communication system and its management structure for some major blame in the shuttle disaster. NASA's current director, James Fletcher, has told reporters he sees some merit in this criticism. In the report made public yesterday, the commission claimed the shuttle's launch decisions were flawed. Fletcher's answered by saying that the accident was, quote, clearly caused by a series of mistakes within NASA procedures. Fletcher says he's monitoring NASA personnel and the management system is going to be reviewed. And he said the shuttle program will not resume until these problems have been addressed and solved.
Where management is weak, we will strengthen it. Where engineering or design or process need improving, we will improve them. Where our internal communications are poor, we will see that they get better.
Fletcher added that he thought the July 1987 liftoff date might be met if financial limitations don't interfere. The Rogers panel report also says several critical safety issues should be addressed before any other shuttle is launched. The report cites several problems that it says had no direct bearing on the explosion in January, but need to be looked at nevertheless. One of the key concerns of the panel is providing some viable escape system for the crew. The report calls on NASA to review ways to allow astronauts to escape from a malfunctioning shuttle. In the current design, the crew members can't get out of a shuttle after liftoff until they've landed it safely someplace. The report says, quote, the commission thinks it's crucial that the vehicle provide some chance for crew survival in emergencies. Another safety concern, landings at the Kennedy Space Center in particular. The commission recommends NASA forego further attempts to land shuttles back at the Florida site, which has relatively narrow runways. This at least until NASA solves some problems with the landing gear. The panel has asked the agency to upgrade the landing gear, the brake, and the tire systems too. The shuttle's tires, for example, have been classified as criticality 1, meaning that a single point failure might result in the loss of the crew and the vehicle. The braking system also has had a long history of minor problems.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. We're going to begin this evening with a story that is simply about the human. And later in this broadcast, the presidential report on the Challenger disaster. Now Congress wants to know even more. The Rogers Commission report on the Challenger disaster was made public yesterday, as you know. It answered a great many questions. There is already some second guessing. Did the commission go far enough? Was the report tough enough? The questions were being asked in the Congress of the Commission Chairman, William Rogers. And here's ABC's James Walker.
Just one day after the presidential report on the shuttle disaster had been released, Commission Chairman William Rogers went to Capitol Hill, where he was sharply questioned by Senator Ernest Hollings. Hollings wondered whether the commission had thoroughly investigated charges that White House officials had pressured NASA to launch Challenger on January 28th, in time to coincide with President Reagan's planned State of the Union address. Rogers told Hollings he found no White House pressure.
I respect you. I don't think there's a bit of evidence that anybody tried to influence this launch. And if we keep talking about it, a lot of people are going to believe it happened. It didn't happen. Well, if you can prove it, I'll apologize to you. I'll come back here and apologize. If you can prove anything like that happened.
Hollings also questioned Rogers about the commission's finding that Lawrence Malloy, former boss of NASA's solid rocket booster program, had allowed 7 shuttle flights to proceed, even though he had been warned about serious problems with the rocket joint. Malloy had also been criticized for not telling the decision makers about those problems.
I find that gross negligence. I don't think he was trying to kill astronauts. Let's be blunt about it. But I think his conduct was of the type and nature of willful, gross misconduct.
This afternoon in Huntsville, Alabama, Malloy said yes, he did pass on warnings about the faulty joint. Asked about other accusations, he declined comment until later. But questioned earlier by House lawmakers, Chairman Rogers said he didn't think there had been criminal negligence. He opposed legal action.
I don't think it would be successful. I don't think it would be in the national interest. I hope it doesn't happen.
Even so, some family members of the Challenger's crew are now thinking about taking legal action. Bruce Jarvis, father of astronaut Gregory Jarvis, said today that he's retained a lawyer to look into it. James Walker, ABC News, Washington.
This was day 2 of the Rogers Commission report on the Space Shuttle tragedy, and it was spent on Capitol Hill. Commission Chairman William Rogers and Vice Chairman Neil Armstrong appeared before House and Senate space committees. They heard promises of new congressional vigilance in monitoring the space program and talked about new escape mechanisms for astronauts, among other things.
Escape systems take a variety of forms, from very simple jump out the door to very complex systems in which an entire section of the vehicle is removed and ejected by rocket propulsion or some other means and recovered as a unit. We think these more exotic systems are probably not practical to incorporate in this design at this stage, but the ones on the simple end deserve additional examination, because as the system exists now for significant parts of the envelope, there really is no method of survival, and we believe some additional method of survival is possible.
But am I correct in assuming that this whole thing occurred within 73 seconds? So any escape mechanism, any ejection system that might be conceived by man wouldn't have been enough to save the crew?
Yes, sir, you're quite correct.
Chairman William Rogers told the congressman he did not believe it would be in the national interest to file criminal charges against anyone connected with the shuttle disaster. He said there was no gross negligence, only misunderstandings over responsibility. Charlene? William Rogers went to Congress today with a report on the Challenger disaster, and correspondent Elizabeth Brackett covered the appearances of the chairman of the Presidential Commission that investigated the shuttle explosion. Elizabeth?
Congress had waited patiently throughout the shuttle investigation for the Rogers Commission to finish its work. That was done yesterday when it released its report that said the shuttle disaster was caused by a faulty booster rocket seal and that NASA management practices were partial causes of the accident. Today, Chairman Rogers told a House subcommittee that the next move was now up to the Congress.
The problem that the nation faces, and in part your committee faces, is what do we do from now on? Where do we go from to deal with that subject? That's really a subject for this committee.
And committee members indicated there would now be a tougher response to that job than in the past.
As a committee, we may have been too trusting in the past, when NASA gave us glowing, optimistic reports about our space program. Hindsight suggests that NASA's view of the space shuttle program was not realistic.
The congressman praised Rogers for the report, then asked if NASA had cooperated by providing information for a report that was, in the end, highly critical of the agency.
There was one aspect of it that we were not satisfied with, and that was the failure of people in Marshall to tell us some facts about the constraints, launch constraints. And I made some comments in the hearings about that, saying that they had almost been able to cover that up. And I think as one of the other members of the committee suggested, it's a matter of mindset. I hope that the mindset of a lot of people in NASA has changed. You got to get moving, and there have to be changes made, and they have to be made quickly, I think. I think one thing that we detected early on in the investigation, which has changed, was there almost was an attitude on the part of some people in NASA, based on their public statements, that the accident never happened, that the commission was causing the problem. And I pointed out to some of them, we didn't have anything to do with the accident. We just came on later on. And it was the NASA problem. That's what caused the accident. That's where it happened. Those are the ones responsible.
How do you change that attitude? How do you institutionalize better information circles? How do you institutionalize access by all of these experts to very top decision-making channels if they have deeply seated concerns about safety, even in the last moments before takeoff? And how do you legislate humility? How do you legislate openness? How do you legislate concern for safety?
I hope that that will be accomplished in part by the report and in part by the investigation, in part by the fact that all of this became public. And to illustrate your point, after we had the hearings which disclosed the opposition of the launch and the failure to communicate that to those people who made the decision to launch, we were all, I don't know whether shocked is too strong a word or not, but we were very concerned about it as a commission. And right at that time, the people in Marshall who were involved had a press conference in which they sort of took issue with us, that we were making too much out of it, which to me illustrated the point you're making. I mean, there has to be a change of mindset. You can't go on this way as if nothing happened. This was a major, major mistake, a tragic accident.
But the chairman did tell the committee he did not think NASA was criminally negligent.
It doesn't seem to me that a prosecution would be successful of anybody in this tragic accident. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that some ambitious prosecutor would think it was a desirable thing to do and make an attempt to do it. I don't think it would be successful. I don't think it would be in the national interest. I hope it doesn't happen.
Chairman Rogers was back for an afternoon session, but this time his questioners were senators, not congressmen. The senators wanted to know why the commission had not blamed specific NASA employees for the accident.
It isn't my zeal to, as some have talked about criminal negligence, I don't think there was any banality. But I do think that when you fix a responsibility, thereupon you really promote safety.
I think I tend to feel as Senator Hollings does, and that is that I just want to make sure that the individuals who behaved improperly, did not follow procedures, were involved in a fatal decision to 7 other individuals, are not allowed to participate in these decisions in the future.
I think that's what the new administrator has to do, and I don't think we should do it. I don't want you to think that we're reluctant that it be done. I'm just saying I don't think it's our job to do it.
Senator Hollings then asked Chairman Rogers how he'd investigated White House pressure on the decision to launch the Challenger.
Because the White House assured us, and the President said so on public in his television program, nothing like that happened. He didn't feel, and I don't feel now, that we should go around summoning people from the White House, because there just wasn't anything like that happen. It's a little bit like trying to investigate a paternity case, going around asking people who's responsible, but there's no baby. It never happened. No baby in this case. You've got to have somebody who says, I think there may be some evidence. There's no evidence in this case. And if people keep talking about it, some people out there in the public is going to say, maybe there's something to it. There isn't. There isn't one scintilla of evidence.
The baby in this case, Mr. Secretary, again, most respectfully, is the explosion itself. Now,
that's not the baby. That's not the baby.
The baby in this case is the explosion itself, and you found that pressure, in addition to the O-ring defect, the scientific or technical fault, there was also the human fault. You see, your commission went into 300 different scientific tests. You interviewed hundreds of witnesses. Here comes the
Senator, I accept the criticism if that's what you want to do. I accept it. I don't think it's valid. I accept it, though. I respect you. I don't think there's a bit of evidence that anybody tried to influence this launch. And if we keep talking about it, a lot of people are going to believe it happened. It didn't happen. Well, if you can prove it, I'll apologize to you.
While the chairman was testifying on Capitol Hill, one of his commission members was holding a news conference in California. Caltech scientist Richard Feynman conducted his own investigation while on the commission and talked privately with engineers who told him they thought shuttle launches were more risky than did their bosses at NASA.
I went and investigated the opinions of different people in NASA, and I found out that many engineers thought it was of the order of 1%. I found some engineers who said it was 1 in 10,000, and management always came with 1 in 100,000. And he said that to me when I looked at it, I saw what looked to me like considerable flaws in the logic by which he obtained the way he reasoned. He said he didn't want to use a mathematical methods, he was going to use engineering judgment. And as far as I could tell, the engineering judgment, so-called, consisted of making up numbers.
In an appendix to the Commission's report, Feynman also found that the shuttle's main engine was flying with the same kind of dangerous problems that plagued the solid rocket boosters, along with the same kind of thinking. We didn't crash last time, so let's keep flying.
The Science and Technology Committee today got more details on the Shuttle Commission report on the Challenger disaster. Vice Chairman Neil Armstrong said while crew safety is of primary concern, there are limitations. Burton Jones has more.
Commission Vice Chairman Neil Armstrong said a foolproof escape system for shuttle astronauts would be impractical. But he said future shuttlecraft could be equipped for escape in some instances.
Escape systems take a variety of forms, from very simple jump out the door to very complex systems in which an entire section of the vehicle is removed and ejected by rocket propulsion or some other means and recovered as a unit. We think these more exotic systems are probably not practical to incorporate in this design at this stage, but the ones on the simple end deserve additional examination.
Throughout the hearing, Commission Chairman William Rogers refused to blame any individual or group for the Challenger disaster. Rogers said the committee found no evidence of criminal negligence.
But I am satisfied that it would be unwise to proceed criminally. I don't believe there was any venality here. And I don't really believe there was gross negligence. I think there was misunderstandings about what each person was responsible for.
Committee resumes its hearings tomorrow. Burton Jones, CNN reporting.
During this morning's hearing, Congresswoman Jan Myers of Kansas asked Chairman Rogers what he considered the villain at NASA. She then answered her own question by saying pressure is that villain. Pressure to carry out commercial and military payloads, to beat the Soviets with space launches, to compete with European shuttle systems. The military in particular is hard hit by the delayed shuttle program. CNN's Carl Rochelle has more.
For years, rocket after rocket blasted into space carrying satellites designed for use by the military. The shuttle carried secret packages. Now, that's all on hold. The military has become heavily dependent on satellites for communication. They give them the capability to talk directly to Washington from almost anywhere in the world by bouncing a signal off a satellite. A new generation of satellites known as Navstar will allow ships and planes to pinpoint their locations by just pushing a few buttons. And there is the promise of a defense against Soviet missiles in the research known as Star Wars. But perhaps the most widely talked about satellites are those that can spy on other countries, like the ones that took pictures of the Soviet nuclear disaster at Chernobyl.
A severe problem is obviously in the area of photographic reconnaissance because we only have one of those satellites up right now and we're basically waiting on the shuttle to put up a replacement.
The Air Force's new Titan D-7 can put heavy payloads like the spy satellites into orbit, but it won't be ready before 1988, and officials may be reluctant to use it until they discover what went wrong with the last Titan they tried to launch.
Meanwhile, the backlog of military satellites continues to grow. The military can exercise priority over business and commercial interest to help it ease the backlog. But even then, many experts say it will take at least 2 years to catch up if the shuttle flies again next year. Carl Rochelle, CNN, The Pentagon.
In South Africa, witnesses opened its investigation today into the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. And some congressmen were critical of their own past supervision of NASA. They promised a tougher stance in the future. The congressional probe began with an appearance before a House committee by the leaders of the Presidential Commission that investigated the accident. CNN's Burton Jones has more on their testimony.
Commission Vice Chairman Neil Armstrong said a foolproof escape system for shuttle astronauts would be impractical. But he said future shuttlecraft could be equipped for escape in some instances.
Escape systems take a variety of forms, from very simple jump out the door to very complex systems in which an entire section of the vehicle is removed and ejected by rocket propulsion or some other means and recovered as a unit. We think these more exotic systems are probably not practical to incorporate in this design at this stage, but The ones on the simple end deserve additional examination.
Throughout the hearing, Commission Chairman William Rogers refused to blame any individual or group for the Challenger disaster. Rogers said the committee found no evidence of criminal negligence.
But I am satisfied that it would be unwise to proceed criminally. I don't believe there was any venality here. And I don't really believe there was gross negligence. I think there was misunderstandings about what each person was responsible for.
Committee resumes its hearings tomorrow. Burton Jones, CNN reporting.
One member of the Rogers Commission has been far more critical of NASA than the Commission report has. Dr. Richard Feynman, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, has said there were so many warnings that something was wrong that the disaster could not really be called an accident. Feynman told a news conference today that NASA chose to ignore those warnings.
One thing that's perfectly clear, the Challenger mission was a final accident of a sequence of things in which there were warning after warning after warning that something was wrong. It's not the kind of accident that just happened and nobody could have expected. It has a history. It has a history of difficulties with these rings of gases blowing by the rubber that they didn't like and they didn't want, of rubber being eroded away, they didn't like, they didn't want, they wasn't designed for. And for 10 years they discussed this question and didn't do anything about it. And it just waited until sooner or later it broke.
Feynman's strongly worded analysis will appear in an appendix to the Commission report to be printed later.
Former White House Daybreak on CNN for Wednesday, June 11th. With Reed Collins in Washington and Molly McCoy and Steve Schatz in Atlanta.
Good morning. Baby Jessie received the heart of a brain-dead infant from Michigan early today. The Space Agency Administrator James Fletcher goes before the House Science and Technology Committee this morning to answer questions about what NASA intends to do in response to the criticisms and the recommendations of the Rogers Commission. William Rogers, the former Secretary of State, testified before two committees yesterday, along with his panel's Vice Chairman, Neil Armstrong. Among other things, Rogers said he doesn't believe the Space Shuttle Challenger was launched despite the bad weather because of pressures from outside the space agency.
I don't think there's a bit of evidence that anybody tried to influence this launch. And if we keep talking about it, a lot of people are going to believe it happened. It didn't happen. Well, if you can prove it, I'll apologize to you. I'll come back here and apologize. If you can prove anything like that happened.
Rogers also said he does not feel any individuals are criminally culpable in the Challenger disaster. CNN, by the way, will bring you live coverage of this morning's hearing beginning at 9:30 Eastern Time. That's 6:30 Pacific. Meanwhile, the Rogers Commission report is being denounced as unfair by the union representing some 1,500 NASA engineers at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama. Dave Nichols, the president of the union, says some of the accusations and the comments really hurt. Some of the engineers at Marshall had helped to develop the shuttle's engines.
It is 5 minutes. Shuttle Director Richard Truly said today that all manned space flights should have been stopped in 1981 when the first seal failure was discovered in a booster rocket joint. And NASA officials showed newly released pictures of the Challenger explosion. We get details from CNN's John Holloman in Washington.
For the first time since the accident more than 4 months ago, NASA showed pictures of the intact Challenger crew cabin falling from the fireball that destroyed the shuttle.
There, it's coming down now. Here. That's the crew compartment, yes.
NASA and the Presidential Commission have refused to speculate whether the crew survived the explosion. But experts from the space agency say privately it is possible the 7 did survive until the cabin hit the ocean. Safe return to flight was clearly the concern of all the committee members. After hearing about the high cost of a crew ejection system, one congressman had questions.
What kind of cost evaluation did we make when we had 7 lives involved? And I don't mean to come down on you. Now, I just wonder what weight we put to a life in this engineering system we're figuring.
NASA Spaceflight Administrator Dick Truly flew the second shuttle mission. the one where O-ring damage was first noticed on a solid rocket booster. Truly was never told about the near disaster.
Frankly, personally, I'm more concerned not that I, as an astronaut, did not know, but that the program, the total program through the level 3, then to the level 2, then to the level 1, didn't work that problem for that flight and others.
Truly says shuttle flight should have been stopped after his flight, and the booster seal problem should have been fixed then. Congressman Bill Nelson also flew on a shuttle which nearly blew up. He presented evidence which he says shows the booster's maker, Morton Thiokol, lied to NASA when it certified the boosters were tested to work in temperatures as cold as 31 degrees. NASA Administrator James Fletcher says safety is his major concern, and that alone will determine when the shuttle goes up again.
We will fly in 1987 if it is safe to do so. We will not fly if it is not.
The panel was surprised to see the new pictures of the Challenger crew cabin, and NASA accident investigators promise more surprises when they testify tomorrow. John Holloman, CNN, Washington.
Lawrence Malloy, who headed the solid rocket booster program at the Marshall Space Flight Center at the time of the explosion, today defended his role in the decision to launch the Challenger. CNN's Tom McNair reports from Huntsville, Alabama.
Lawrence Malloy, the former head of NASA's Solid Rocket Booster Division, says he's done nothing wrong.
I feel that I have performed the functions that are assigned to me in a professional manner, and certainly not in a grossly negligent manner.
Malloy was transferred to another division at the Marshall Space Center after the Challenger accident, a move he doesn't call a demotion, but a natural management change. He says he's now concerned that some people are talking about a criminal investigation.
I think anyone who had powerful people in the U.S. government calling for a criminal investigation would be concerned with that, and yes, I'm concerned with that.
Do you think that they will attempt to take you to criminal court?
I don't know. I don't know.
Despite allegations to the contrary, Malloy says he told the truth when he testified before the Rogers Commission about concerns that the solid rocket boosters might fail.
The O-ring erosion on each occasion was discussed at level 2, at the center board here, and then at level 2, and then at level 1. And as I said, I won't take exception to anybody's judgment as to whether or not that was in a serious manner or not. I would only say that only serious matters were taken forward.
Malloy says it was scientific tests by engineers at Morton Thiokol on a model, combined with the physical evidence of previous O-ring erosion on shuttle flights that allowed missions to continue.
That correlation of that model and the testing that was done to indicate that one could take a great deal more erosion than the maximum theoretical possible is where we then convinced ourselves that even that was an acceptable situation. And in hindsight, I believe that was a mistake. I think that's where we started down the road to eventually having an accident of the type that happened with 51L.
Tom McNair, CNN, Huntsville.
NASA today showed Congress new pictures which for the first time clearly show the Challenger crew cabin emerging from the ball of fire which engulfed the spaceship at the time of the explosion, and then plummeting from the sky to the sea. It is still not known for sure exactly when all 7 astronauts died. The indefinite hold on the next shuttle flight is causing some serious problems for many of the people in the space program, including astronauts. Here's ABC's Rebecca Chase.
Here at the Johnson Space Center, training of the astronauts for the next 8 shuttle flights is still going ahead. Nearly 1,000 hours of preparing for a mission that has no launch date and no flight plan.
Well, we have an investment to protect. We've got a large number of people who have the skill of flying the shuttle, and since the simulators are still there and working, we intend to just keep up a proficiency level.
But just today, 55-year-old Owen Garriott, NASA's most experienced astronaut, resigned, saying he would rather become a private consultant than endure another long wait before flying in space.
So if I have to wait another 3 or 4 years, I think I can probably accomplish more on the outside.
Even the center director here admits that both the accident and now the Rogers Commission report have left many employees discouraged about NASA's future.
Well, I think we have to be a little concerned about losing some of our very talented middle and more senior management people that's been here for a long time and really form what I call a very strong backbone of NASA.
Still, the NASA can-do spirit seems intact.
We need to go forward, and I have no doubts we will go forward.
But as NASA faces the challenge of fixing both its hardware and safety problems, it is also concerned about its people problem, keeping up the morale and motivation of its workforce during some of the agency's most difficult days. Rebecca Chase, ABC News at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Just one other note about Challenger. Yesterday, Senator Ernest Hollings accused Lawrence Malloy, who allowed the launch to proceed, of willful gross negligence in the Challenger disaster. Today, Malloy, the former director of the Shuttle's rocket booster program, had this to say to Hollings and his other critics.
I am concerned, of course, with the tragedy that occurred and the implication or the pointing of a finger at Larry Malloy as being the single individual responsible for that is very disturbing to me. And I take some comfort in the commission report that did not draw that conclusion.
In the Senate today, the continuing Fallout Commission report on the space shuttle tragedy, NASA officials James Fletcher and Richard Truly told a House committee the presidential panel's report would serve as a blueprint for organizational and other changes. The congressman also had a look at new pictures of the Challenger accident that were released today by NASA. Elizabeth Brackett reports.
The film, slowed down, enhanced, and transferred to videotape, gave the congressman a chilling view of the last moments of the Challenger mission. Here, the external fuel tank has exploded, and the crew cabin, clearly intact, emerges from the lines of wreckage and smoke streaking the sky. An isolated shot of the cabin, enhanced and shown almost frame by frame, again shows the crew cabin intact. The Rogers Commission released no new information on how long the crew may have survived, and there were no new details today. Instead, the new head of the shuttle program, Admiral Richard Truly, told the committee NASA was looking ahead and had already begun to implement the recommendations of the Rogers report.
Every single CRID 1 and 1R specific element of the shuttle system is being re-looked at, and if it's found wanting, it'll be redesigned and requalified prior to the next flight.
Truly acknowledged that this could push back the proposed first flight date even beyond next summer. Congressman Bill Nelson raised a different reason for a flight delay. He hinted that the failure of the manufacturer of the solid rocket booster to test the rocket at low temperatures could mean a cancellation of the Morton Thiokol contract to build future solid rockets.
Since everybody is saying that it was not complied with, in addition to why wasn't it complied with, is there some contractual breach here?
Most agree that little new information will emerge as to the cause of the Challenger accident from these hearings, and even congressmen chided senators for grandstanding at yesterday's session. But both bodies say they need to review the ground covered by the Rogers Commission in order to set the budget and the priorities for future space flights.
President Reagan said today the Challenger tragedy would not stop the United States from proceeding with its space program. Mr. Reagan spoke at the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum in Washington. He said the U.S. will go ahead with plans to build a manned space station in the next decade.
Eroding rocket seals were a problem on the second shuttle flight, which Truly piloted in 1981. But he says he knew nothing about it until after the Challenger accident. Truly says further space missions should have been grounded in 1981 when the damage was discovered. He testified today before a hearing of the House Science and Technology Committee. He also endorsed the Rogers Commission report released Monday on the Challenger accident. CNN's Burton Jones has prepared this report.
Their report.
Admiral Richard Truly, a former astronaut, said the Rogers Commission report would guide his agency in restoring safety and integrity to the space program.
Their report is a roadmap for me, and I intend to use it as my mandate for action.
The Challenger disaster, coupled with recent failures to launch satellites by other means, has virtually paralyzed the U.S. space program. Truly endorsed the Commission's recommendation to develop a variety of vehicles, including unmanned rockets, for future space flight.
We are participating with other governmental agencies in a comprehensive review of our nation's ability to assure access to space. I want you to know that I personally concur with the mixed fleet concept to avoid reliance on a single vehicle for our nation.
The next shuttle is scheduled for launch in July of 1987, and there is growing concern that NASA cannot meet that deadline. NASA Administrator James Fletcher testified, if the shuttle isn't ready, it won't fly.
For the moment, we keep the date of summer of 1987 as a goal which may change. What is not changeable is our commitment to fly again only when it is safe to do so.
The hearings on Capitol Hill will continue for the next few weeks. Burton Jones, CNN, reporting.
Earlier today, President Reagan promised young astronauts the shuttle disaster will not prevent the United States from resuming its space program. The president told the math and science students from across this country that, quote, we're not stopping. We're going ahead with a space program worthy of the memory of the Challenger 7. The president also pledged that the United States, quoting again, not only will do everything we planned to do before, we're going to do it better.
NASA says it plans to issue a progress report this morning on efforts to develop a safer rocket booster joint for America's space shuttles. A ruptured booster joint triggered the Challenger explosion. A safer joint design is a key prerequisite to future shuttle launches. NASA's in the process of narrowing its list of design candidates. The space agency's administrator says he still hopes to resume shuttle flights in July of next year. But NASA sources say it is unlikely the redesigned boosters will be ready in time, and the next launch probably won't take place till 1988.
White House sources say President Reagan is close to giving the go-ahead on construction of a fourth space shuttle. That space shuttle would replace Challenger, which blew up. However, the cost remains a major obstacle. Estimates to replace Challenger and all the equipment lost could run as high as $3 billion. As to a decision by Reagan, an aide says we're close. Thursday, the president met with his Economic Policy Council discussing proposals to commercialize part of the space program. That idea is opposed by NASA, which would lose about $850 million in fees.
More than 6 months after the shuttle disaster, NASA credibility remains damaged. Some say permanently. Concern remains for the future of the U.S. space program, as we hear in this report from John Holloman.
More than 6 months after the Challenger disaster, America's civilian space program is still adrift and has been overtaken by the Pentagon. The reason is a lack of goals.
I think the American people are behind us today. They'd like to know where we're pointed. Clearly, we're going to have to do that, or we can't ask for the kind of American support of the public that we have.
The military program knows where it's going. It has clear objectives. It has budgets to carry these out. Whereas in the case of the civilian space program, we've rather lost the way.
The Pentagon will spend more than $15 billion on space next year, while NASA Administrator James Fletcher is forced by the White House to ask for less than $8 billion, exactly the same budget as before the costly Challenger accident.
You ought to come and say, look, the White House and the Office of Management and Budget are not giving us what we think is the minimum requirement for moving NASA forward and not letting this tragedy destroy the agency.
Other parties who have their own interests are coming in and, in a sense, taking advantage of NASA's weakened condition to really grind you down.
I, Jim Fletcher, have not given up, and we are still fighting the battle. We haven't lost yet.
NASA is fighting for survival on many fronts. It's fighting to get the shuttle flying again. The date for the next flight has been postponed 3 times and could be postponed again. And it's still fighting a battle for credibility. The last 4 volumes of the Presidential Challenger Commission report reopened the question of NASA's competence, with information that the flight before Challenger was almost launched without enough fuel to make it into orbit. NASA supporters in Congress say Administrator Fletcher must make a stronger stand for goals at the White House, or his agency, once the most respected division of the federal government, will simply fade into history.
NASA is expected forward in resuming shuttle flights during a news conference this morning. A NASA source says the space agency's engineers have come up with a new design for the shuttle's solid rocket boosters. A presidential commission blames faulty booster joints for the explosion that destroyed Challenger last January. The panel concluded 2 O-rings became unsealed and allowed superhot gases to burn through a fuel tank wall. The NASA source says the new design adds a 3rd O-ring seal and a metal lip that's supposed to keep the gases from leaking. CNN will cover the NASA news conference live beginning around 11:30 a.m. Eastern, 8:30 a.m. Pacific time.
quickly, a new shuttle rocket booster design, a big step toward resumption of space shuttle flights.
This is Day Watch on CNN for Tuesday, August 12th. With Molly McCoy and Bob Kane in Atlanta, Ralph Begleiter in Washington, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. A source within NASA says the agency has come up with a new design for the solid booster rocket used on America's space shuttles. The space agency is expected to announce that improvement in a news conference in about 1/2 hour from now. A presidential commission blamed a faulty booster joint for the explosion that destroyed Challenger. The panel said 2 O-rings became unsealed, allowing extremely hot gases to burn through a fuel tank. That touched off the accident that killed Challenger's crew of 7. The new booster design reportedly calls for a 3rd O-ring seal and a metal lip that will keep gases from escaping. The NASA source says the new boosters could be ready as early as December of next year if they pass a series of tests. That would mean shuttle flights could resume as early as the spring of 1988.
This is Day Watch on CNN for Thursday, August 28th. With
Space Shuttle Challenger and its 7 months of scouring the ocean's floor. The Air Force research said that it was the biggest recovery effort ever conducted in the world, and it cost more than $100 million. The project involved 6,000 people and numerous planes, ships, and submarines. Overall, more than 200,000 pounds of debris was recovered, and that accounts for just about 45% of the entire shuttle. One member of the recovery team said the search was so emotional, he felt like he was looking for a member of his own family.
We have all known for problem with the solid rocket booster which led to the disaster on the Space Shuttle Challenger. We also knew that NASA was aware of the problem beforehand. Now we learn that NASA was so concerned that it was actually developing hardware to solve it, though the shuttle was allowed to keep flying. ABC's Bettina Gregory is in Washington.
Last month, NASA engineers announced they'd redesigned parts of the solid rocket booster which failed, specifically the O-rings which let superheated gases burn through the walls of the propellant tank.
We have made good progress, and I think we're well on the way to accomplishing a good, safe redesign.
But now experts and documents reveal a key element of that redesign announced last month was actually invented as early as 1981. Space experts say this key element was a steel casing which would lock the O-ring seals firmly in place. Although there was controversy about the weight and effectiveness of the new part, by 1985 NASA ordered 72 new steel casings for the booster rockets and intended to replace them on the entire shuttle fleet by 1988. This is providing even more ammunition to space experts like John Pike, who say NASA should not have allowed the shuttle to keep flying.
NASA knew that it had a problem that would seriously endanger the shuttle and the astronauts on board, and they should have thought twice about flying while they had that problem.
NASA has always denied any wrongdoing. In a statement issued today, the agency simply said these issues have been exhaustively discussed in the Rogers Commission and in congressional testimony. But it seems the question of what NASA knew about this O-ring problem, when it knew it, and why the agency has been so slow to fix it will continue to plague NASA, especially in light of at least 2 lawsuits filed by widows of Challenger crew members. Bettina Gregory, ABC News, Washington.
According to yesterday's New York Times, the debris was to be sealed in an abandoned missile silo within the next 2 weeks. But NASA's General Counsel Office issued a delay last Thursday. NASA's Public Affairs Director said she didn't know when all the claims would be settled. One has been filed against the government, another against Morton Thiokol, makers of the solid fuel rocket blamed for the explosion. And others, reportedly seeking compensation, have also been filed.